All right, here we go. We are live, Facebook Live on or from my phone here. How are you guys doing today? Let me know if you're out there. Drop a comment down below. Sure.
Thanks for having me on.
What's going on, my friend? How are you? Awesome. How's it going, man? You're, sorry, we're having a little trouble hearing you. You're on a little bit. A little bit muffled there.
Is the audio any better now?
No, it seems like it's kind of crackling a little bit. Oh,
How about now? Is this any better?
perfect. Perfect, man.
Better?
Awesome.
Don't call me. I'm live. Okay, great. Sorry about that.
You're good,
Yeah,
man. How's it going?
Great. Yeah, just running errands today. Busy. I'm here at Seeker right now, actually, with the guys, Rick and Ed. There they are in the background.
Nice.
Hey.
How's it going?
How you doing?
Good, man. Good. Good to see you guys.
Good to be seen by you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah,
Awesome, Church.
where I'm picking up some swordfish gear rods, actually. We do a
Nice.
production run of factory wrapped Seeker swordfish gear fishing rods here for swordfish fishing.
Excellent.
So
Those are pretty much your go-to right there for sorties.
absolutely.
Awesome.
Yeah, I worked with them on the design of these. I have them wrapped a certain way to give them a little different action, and we have a winner. We knocked it out of the park. They got some really nice action to them, and they're built with nice high-end components. And obviously, the Seeker rods have a long history here in SoCal as being one of the best rods out.
Excellent. Yeah, Seeker's always been a huge supporter and huge sponsor of CCA California too. So we're super happy that they're here right in California too.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's nice to be able to come in and walk into the warehouse and pull on a bunch of different blanks and check out the action on them, do comparisons, and talk to the guys on what they recommend and see what's going on in the industry with them.
Awesome, man. Well, Serge, tell me about what have you been up to lately, man? How's quarantine been treating you? And have you been out in the water recently?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I almost did this interview from a boat because we went out fishing yesterday, and we were supposed to come back this afternoon, but we actually cut the trip a little short. The guys I was on the boat with said, the conditions look like they're coming up, and we might want to just head back. And we were a little low on fuel reserves as well, so they made the judgment call, and I was like, all right, let's do it. And we made it back last night, probably around 11 p.m. or something. That wasn't too bad.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Let's check in with everyone in the comments here. We've got
All right.
Grant and Kent here. Jim
Yeah.
Hendricks, how are you, man? Mr. Davey Brown from Okuma's here. How's it going, Davey?
Awesome.
Barney's here. Alex gave me this nice haircut earlier today from the sports barber in Dana Point. Thank you, Alex.
Oh, nice.
Yep. Bill, Steven, Todd from TB Metal Arts here. What's going on, Todd? Excellent. Jim actually has a question, our first one. What Seeker action do you recommend?
The action?
Yeah.
For swordfish, I prefer more like a medium action as opposed to a heavier action rod. So more forgiving tip on it, especially when you're fishing it as a tip rod with your bait down 1,000 feet and a heavy weight, like 6 pounds, 8 pounds, or 10 pounds of weight. you look at that tip and try to spot a bite if a fish is whacking at the bait. So sometimes it could be very subtle, other times they're very obvious. So you definitely want a rod with action that will benefit you being able to see that happening. And then, not to mention, when you're fighting these fish, we generally fight them with lower drag. It's complete different from fighting bluefin, to where you're just a tug of war, right? Now with swordfish, you got to finesse them. You gotta fish them as if you're doing light tackle, really light line tackle with them, because a lot of people suffer from pulling hooks on them, and that's one of the main things that we struggle with is pulling hooks on swordfish. So I try to tailor my equipment to where I reduce the odds of that happening, with a little softer tip rods and the hooks that I use as well. I'm using these special hooks that have a thicker shank on them, made by Fudo. So I'm trying to get the best bite from the hook, and then combine that with proper action from the rod to reduce the odds of pulling hooks.
Excellent, excellent. And matching your gear with the correct rod and reel, and then also hook size. That's pretty crucial for swordfish, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, there's guys who totally wing it and are successful, right? But when you really refine your equipment and set it up a little better, then your odds go up. The last thing we want to do is lose a trophy fish.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Jim's asking, what model number are those rods?
Swordfish gear, secret rod. That's the model
Excellent,
number.
excellent. Well, tell us a little bit about swordfish gear. What's that all about?
So, obviously, my history in swordfish fishing, I got real passionate with it, and I was infected by the fever. So I was eat, sleep, breathe swordfish. I was on a total mission to land one when I first got started, because my initial fight, one that I fought it for 3 hours solo on my boat, and then a friend got dropped off on my boat, and I went an additional 3 hours, and a total of 6 hours before I pulled the hook. So when I pulled the hook on that one, like, I was having nightmares every night until the following weekend when I finally landed one. So
Naturally.
after that, I was just infatuated with swordfish, and I invested so much time into it, you know, to pursue these fish and actually land a couple. And it wasn't until last year around the PCS boat show that I found myself, you know, sourcing products for the swordfish. And then I said, okay, well, why don't I just offer some products for resale? So when I did that show, I had tackle for swordfish on display there for people to buy. And that kind of kicked it off as swordfish gear. So I think it was shortly after that is when I came up with the name and decided to go, full on website and
Awesome.
move forward with it.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, you kind of touched a little bit about your background and all that stuff. How did you get started? I know you're passionate about swordfish, but ultimately, how did you get started in this business?
Long history, actually. So in the business in 2002, I went Expert Marine Electronics is my main business, where I do sales and install of marine electronics and electrical on boats and yachts. So '02, I went full marine and only focused on marine, and I've been doing it ever since. So, back then I was more of a hardcore scuba diver and doing, occasional fishing here and there. And then after that, I migrated more towards fishing, and then did more fishing than scuba diving. So I've been in and out of that for, you know, since '02, or actually '99, when I was really getting into it for scuba diving. But it wasn't until like the big bluefin that moved in. That was like, okay, my calling. I had to go out and do that. It was pretty pretty much what got me hooked on the last go around. So it's been probably 4 years that I've been like super hardcore, almost, I want to say every weekend, but it's not that bad.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's never enough, right? If you're not only going on the weekends, there's always the weekdays as well, and that basically is the story with all fishing.
Right, right. We get a
Yeah,
little caught up in the moment sometimes. But
absolutely. Awesome.
yeah, so my history is basically that with Expert Marine and doing the marine electronics. So I've always been surrounded by a lot of fishermen, working on their boats and stuff, and then, fishing myself as well. And then it wasn't until we transitioned into the swordfish that I came up with swordfish gear.
Excellent. Excellent. Awesome, man. And for those of you who are joining us watching live, if you have a question for Surge, just make sure you drop it in the comment below. We'd love to answer those for you. So let's kind of go back. Let's dive into sword fishing. I know it's your passion. You're very successful at it. I see almost a post a week with a new fish. What's your typical go-to setup for sword fishing? I know there's deep drop and electric reels and all that. What's your go-to setup?
So I've been fishing one tip rod, and one buoy rod, and I try to mix it up with a hand crank Okuma 80 wide, and then my Epoch electric reel. Just the convenience of being able to utilize an electric reel and not have to wind by hand or with a power drill attachment is huge. Honey, we might have to pull the truck out of the parking lot. Sorry, guys.
You're good. You're
I
good.
got my wife in the car with me and Lucy. Where are you, Lucy? So, yeah, the preferred setup for me is to do one of each, and then I kind of leave it up to the swordfish gods to see which rod gets bit. And they decide which rod I fight the fish on.
Nice, nice. Yeah, I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head there. It's like, when you're deep dropping, especially, the electric reel is just absolutely critical. Otherwise, you're just going to burn yourself out, burn your arms and all that stuff out, I bet.
Well, I wouldn't say that. It's just different, right? It's definitely not for everyone, but there is a big convenience factor that goes along with having a nice electric reel,
Absolutely.
especially when we're on a slower day to where we're not getting we're having to work really hard for the bite, right? We could cover different spots. We could drop our baits in one zone and drift there for an hour or so. Then after that, okay, doesn't seem like anybody's home here. I'm not liking what I see on the fish finder. Let me relocate to a different spot. So in that scenario, I can hit the switch on the electric reel and then get on my second reel and work that myself with a power drill attachment and be more efficient with my time, actually. So it's letting me do more drops in one day, if I want to do exploratory stuff and cover different spots.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you, so, obviously there's different spots all throughout Southern California, whether it's Catalina or Santa Cruz. Is there is a method to where you're kind of dropping and almost like running and gunning in a sense where you're pretty active moving from spot to spot, right?
Well, everybody has their own style, right?
Mm-hmm.
So some people in some areas are just inherently, they set you up so you could do a long drift across that ridge or that drop off and really not have to pick up and relocate if you commit to that spot. But there are other areas where I'll look at the topographical map of the seafloor and be like, man, that little corner in there in that canyon looks like a fishy spot, right? So I want to go drop my bait in there and see if anybody's home. So we'll do that and then give that a chance. And then sometimes the current will be taking me in a different direction where I don't want, or I'm not seeing the life that I want to be seeing on the fish finder, and then I'll make the judgment call to pull up and then go check a different spot. This fishery is so new there are established spots that have been productive where you'll see a fleet of boats working, but there's so much other uncharted territory that could potentially be holding fish. And sometimes it's nice to get away from the fleet and be alone out there and be able to send your buoy rod a mile away practically. But you always got to worry about it getting ran over by another boat. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. Carrie has a question. Out of the number of swordfish trips you take, approximately what is your catch to trip ratio?
not very good. Yeah, I think if I average my total numbers, I'm about 10 trips per fish. So it's not
Wow.
very good. But, I go when I want to go. There's guys out there that wait to hear about, fish biting, and then they decide to go fish for swordfish, which, might be a smarter approach. But like I said, I'm going when I want to go, and I'm also trying to uncover new spots and fish different spots away from where everybody else is fishing the traditional spots. Not to say I won't fish a traditional spot, because sure, sometimes I'll go out and make a loop and cover the local offshore banks, do drops on those, and if I don't find anything interesting, then I'll run back in and cover the coastal spot.
Yeah,
So
and obviously it goes without saying too, where especially the swordfish fishery, you have to put in your time, otherwise you're just not going to be successful. And you also have to, use your time pretty wisely, I would say, right?
you got to put your time in. Absolutely. You got to study the tide charts and
Hmm.
look at the current charts online and surface temperatures and all that stuff. It's kind of like offshore fishing. You do a little bit of research and then your odds go up. But if you just go out there and drop a line in a random place, I mean,
Hmm.
you just don't know.
Yeah. Carrie also has another question. I think you touched on this briefly, but do you always stick with swordfish when you're on a trip, or do you sometimes switch to another species?
Um, to be successful with the swordfish, you really got to commit to it. Um, I don't claim to be as good to be able to say, all right, I'm gonna block off 3 hours of the day to go fish them, and I'm gonna catch one then, and then the rest of the day I could fish for other stuff. No, you pretty much got to commit to it. I'll give you an example. One trip, it was a friend of mine. We were on my boat and we fished the backside of Catalina. So we had planned a swordfish trip, and we were out there deep dropping with baits in the water, and bluefin start boiling around the boat. Oh my
Naturally.
God. So we cast, but they're out of range. And then I'm like, well, I can't chase them down with all my gear in the water. So we actually reeled up the rods, put everything away, and then chased bluefin for a couple hours. And we hooked one, but my buddy lost it because it was on lighter line. It was probably like on 30 or 40 pound. And that was it. So after that, like, oh, okay, let's go back to deep dropping. So we're deep dropping. I'm like, man, we probably missed prime time wasting our time with the bluefin when we could have probably got a swordfish around that time. You figure if someone's ringing the dinner bell at the surface, right? They might be feeding down there too at
Mhm.
the 1,000 foot range or wherever they're at. So that trip kind of just made me understand that I got to be committed to it. And if it's going to be a swordfish trip, it's going to be a swordfish trip.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think more often than not, especially the last handful of years, where you might be fishing in the same zone or relatively close to both bluefin and swordfish, just with the abundance of bluefin that we've had in Southern California, especially this year, or just right around the island, right around the corner over there. Super tempting, I bet.
Right. Well, I'll tell you, yesterday it was kind of opposite. We went out and we fished Cortez Bank, and we were, focused on the big bluefin flying the kite with the flying fish. And I was so tempted. I brought a swordfish outfit with me, and I was so tempted. Like, I wanted to drop there so bad because that whole area is so fishy right now. It's holding a lot of fish. Like, why wouldn't swordfish be mixed in? So I was so tempted to do that, but we just didn't work out. We had our hands full with other stuff with the bluefins. So
Gotcha. Gotcha.
yeah.
Yeah, and there's definitely some trophies to be had out there right now. Jim has a question. Do you use a 2 kW fish finder? What frequency? What transducer?
Okay. Personally, on my boat, I only have a 25-foot skiff, so I don't have a lot of room in the compartment to mount the bigger transducers. So I have the 1,000 watt transducers. It's the 175 high wide and the 175 low. They're both 1,000 watt transducers, flush mounts through hull, and it does a pretty good job for me. But I can't claim to be able to mark swordfish with that transducer. I've seen some really good readings with it, and I've sent baits down and they didn't get touched. And so if they were swordfish, they would have eaten that bait. You
Yeah.
know, it'd be hard to fathom that they would sit there and ignore a nice freshly rigged squid. So
Oh yeah, so tempting.
yeah,
Um,
but the other boats with bigger transducers, like the 2 kW or 3 kW transducers, are able to actually mark swordfish. The 599 series from Airmar is the popular one, which you could do an in hull or you could do a through hull if you have a bigger yacht. But they're pretty big units. They're 3.5 feet long.
nice, nice. What, out of curiosity, when you're looking at a fish finder, I mean, is there anything special in picking out swordfish other than just the depth right there, or is there a particular mark that you're looking for?
We're looking for life, actually, looking for life and bait on the fish finder as well. So there's been times where we see bait going down to 600 feet, for example. Nice concentrated bait balls. And to me, that looks like a fishy zone. For the most part, we're looking at what's called the deep scattering layer, the DSL. That tends to hang around the 1,000 foot range. But with different time of days and different conditions, you will notice it go up shallower. So it usually will be shallower early in the morning, gray light, and then work its way down deeper as the sun gets brighter around noontime, where the sun's overhead and its maximum intensity. It's going to be the deepest, which is going to be around that 1,000 foot range. So I use my fish finder to see where that layer is, and then decide how deep I'm going to put my bait. But for the most part, the prime swordfish depth to fish is between 800 to 1,000 feet or 1,100 feet.
Excellent, excellent. That was going to be my next question. I know I've heard every answer from 600 to 1,000 or up to 1,500. So just kind of curious to see what you would say.
Right, right. Like I
Yeah.
said, for the most part, the DSL has been around the 1,000 foot range. There's been a couple trips where it was shallower, especially earlier on the day, or as it gets darker, then it'll start coming up. But for the most part, you want to have your baits deep. If you're fishing multiple rods, then you could experiment. You could put, one bait at 1,000 feet, put another bait at 600 feet, and then on your tip rod, you could work the water column. You could send it down to the DSL, work it there for a bit, jig it up a couple hundred feet, let it sit, go up another couple hundred feet, let it sit, and really work that water column, giving that bait some swimming action.
Excellent, excellent. Kent wants to know, what tides do you like to fish?
Mainly slack tide. Yeah, from what we've looked at, it tends to be the preferred time to go for swordfish.
Excellent, excellent. Dave Rody's checking in. I think we just touched on this, but I'll ask it anyway. Are modern electronics limited in any way in providing accurate images on deep drops?
Absolutely not. The limiting factor is your wallet thickness. How much money you want to throw at it. The 3 kW transducers are quite pricey, but they definitely pay off with their performance.
Yep, and that's the case. I mean, especially in boat ownership, it just bring out another 1,000. What boat stands for.
Right, right,
Yep.
absolutely. But yeah, the modern electronics is spectacular, actually. I fish Simrad myself on my boat. I really like their equipment, how it's set up, their menu structures, um, their their performance all around. The amount of technology that you get in one display screen is off the charts. Like, for example, this past trip yesterday, we were out there chasing the bluefin. So I was using the structure scan on the Simrad in conjunction with the up and down uh, high wide frequency. And I was marking fish off to the port and starboard side of the boat. And then I could look at those schools to see which one was more dense, which one had more fish in it, or bigger marks. And then I could decide to turn the boat left or right and then send the kite out to that school. So that actually, doing that paid off with the fish that we landed yesterday.
Huh,
And the
interesting.
structure scan is mainly more for structure oriented for like bass fishing or coastal, which is upper 100 feet or shallower, right? You want to get in and survey a cove in the island. You look at your structure scan and you could really see a detailed picture of what the ocean bottom looks like, the shape of the rocks, whether it's natural rock or artificial reef. You could see a shipwreck if it was there with a nice, real defined outline. And like I said, the structure scan's not optimized for finding fish, but it is very useful.
Excellent. That's really, really good info right there. Carrie's asking, what is it about fishing for swordfish that keeps you going in such as high risk, high reward environment?
Oh man, well, they're just phenomenal species of fish. Like they're so rare here in Southern California. The percentage of fishermen that have actually landed a swordfish is pretty low in this, out of all the other fishermen, right? So um, one thing, it's rare. It's kind of an exclusive club that you join once you land one, and they're just magnificent creatures. Like they could withstand the pressure down 1,000 feet or greater, and then they could come up, to the surface and put on a hell of a fight. And then pound for pound, they're one of the strongest fish in the sea. When you look at them, they're solid muscle all the way down to the base of the tail, and it doesn't taper off like a normal fish. They're fat and dense all the way down to the tail. Super strong fish. No two fish will fight the same. Each one has its own personality, and they're a total apex predator. When you get it next to the boat and they roll over and look at you with that eye, they're sizing you up to see how they could hurt you. It's not coincidental.
Yeah,
They, yeah, people need to be real careful when dealing with them. These fish don't play games.
absolutely, absolutely. I know a couple weeks ago, or maybe even a month ago, I saw you were just on the offshore podcast with Chase Offfield, and you had an awesome
Mm-hmm.
story about I believe it was over 400 pounds, right? A 400-pound fish.
Right. The last one that we got was 440 pounds. Um, we were supposed to fish Catalina that weekend, actually, and I got a phone call from a friend of mine saying, "Hey, I just landed a fish out here," because I coached him to give him some pointers and some tips on equipment configuration and stuff. And he landed it, so he was super stoked. And I'm like, man, I'm tempted to go up there now. And I had my boat and trailer with me. I had just gotten ice at the market. I was a couple blocks away from the launch ramp in Los Alamitos. And I'm like, you know what? I looked at my wife. I'm like, let's go fish Santa Cruz instead. She's like, okay. So we went back home, picked up Lucy because we had left her at home for this trip, and I was like, man, I wish we would have brought Lucy. Well, now we're going somewhere else, so let's just swing by the house, pick up Lucy, and pick up a couple other supplies, and then make the trip over. So we did that. We made the trip up to Ventura, trailering the boat, launched it, got out there and fished the first day for no bites. I saw my friend land his first swordfish, and we gave him a hand as well. It was funny because I was fishing one zone and wasn't liking what I saw, so I reeled up the baits, and then I made a move. I saw my friend there, so I pulled up next to him. We side tied. So I brought some skirts that he wanted for swordfish. We were side tied. I gave him the skirts, and we're shooting the shit. And then his tip rod started getting bit, and he hooked up. Those fish on. I'm like, oh, dude, what am I doing here? Chit chatting. I got to put a bait in the water.
You're the good luck charm, I guess.
And then he's like, well, dude, we got a buoy here. Like, why don't you just take it on your boat? I'm like, all right, fine. So I took their buoy rod, put it on my boat. I drove away from them and pulled the buoy away from their fish so they wouldn't get tangled up. They fought their fish, landed it, and then we came up side tight again, and I helped them pull the fish onto their boat. And then I gave them back their buoy rod and then took off and went looking for my own fish. So we went the rest of that day with no bites, and then spent the night at the island, came out and fished it the next day, and we got bit like at 10:30 in the morning.
Nice.
9:30. My wife's correcting me. Thank you. That has a better memory than I do.
Awesome. Yeah, that must have been awesome to just kind of make that split decision call, go up, and then actually capitalize on it too.
Right. It definitely paid off. And what was cool as well was that I put her to fight it on the hand crank reel. So it bit the rod with the Makaira 80 wide, and we fought it. I had her reeling on it most of the time. It bit the buoy rod, so we had to bring it in and take the buoy off. At first, I thought it was fouled on kelp or something because it didn't act the same as other fish that we've hooked. The buoy didn't lay down. It kind of just leaned over a little bit. It seemed like it was swimming a little bit. And normally these fish will swim the weight up, relieve the pressure from the buoy, and the buoy will lay down. That's your indicator. Oh, we got a fish on. So this one, it wasn't doing that, but it was kind of pulling to the right, and there was a lot of debris in the area, just random kelp stringers. So I thought it was fouled out, and then I start reeling on it, and I get tight on it. I'm like, man, there's something heavy here, but I don't know if it's kelp or if it's a fish. Like, and if it's a fish, I don't think it's a swordfish according to the way it's pulling line, but I could feel it. I didn't feel any tail beats. I didn't feel it pulling drag. It just felt like dead weight. So we cleared the tip rod, got back on that one, and then I started backing the boat up on it and had my wife reel on it. We got the buoy off, and then you could tell it was a fish, and it started pulling a little drag at that time. So once we got close to it and I took the weight off, the fish started acting really erratic, started swimming under the boat. So I had to drive on it and do counterclockwise circles with it, with my wife on the reel.
Yeah,
It was
and
quite the fight.
oh, I bet. So
Yeah,
actually, perfect timing. Jim's asking, what is the process, the normal process, I should say, after the buoy falls over? How do you hook the fish when that occurs?
there's a couple different things to do. So if generally on the buoys, we should be fishing heavier weight, like 8 to 10 pounds. And in my opinion, that much weight is enough to set the hook in the fish and keep the hook in place. So some guys will tell you you should put the boat in gear and bump the drag up to like 30 pounds and drive away from the fish to really drive that hook in. But I'm starting to feel that I lean more towards the finessing the fight approach as opposed to the horsing it in approach myself. To where if the buoy lays down, then I know I got a heavy weight on there holding that hook in place. I could just back the boat up towards the buoy and get the line back on the reel, disconnect the buoy, and then from there start following the fish around and picking up the buoy, because usually they'll swim that weight up to the surface. And once that happens, it's easy for you to get to the weight.
Yeah, so let's kind of talk about that. I had heard something a while ago about, granted, I don't fish swordfish at all. I've never done it before, but normally in a typical circumstance, you actually, if you're reeling in a fish relatively quickly within, say, give or take 10, 15 minutes, you kind of want to have that weight on so it basically tires itself out where it has to carry that weight, right?
Unfortunately, the train was going by and I couldn't hear the first part of the question.
Okay,
But
well, so granted, I'm not a sword fisherman at all. Never done it before, but I've heard, rumor has it that, when it comes to the weight, all that weight, whether it's 10, 12 pounds or whatever, um, normally if you're finding that fish and you get that fish up to the boat within 10 minutes or so or whatever like that, some guys will actually leave that weight on so that the fish can kind of tire itself out. Is that pretty true?
absolutely, you could definitely use that approach as well, to where you can let the weight tire the fish out. Um, Goes either way. It kind of depends on the personality of the fish as well. So there's guys who will leave the weight on as long as possible, and let the fish fight the weight. Then there's other guys who try to get the weight off as soon as possible, because if the fish jumps and thrashes around, it could pull that weight a certain direction, and the inertia of that weight pulling on the hook, once it snaps and comes tight, can potentially pull the hook out. So it is a little rare, but it can happen. So it's not, I'm not going to tell anybody that's the way you should do it or this way the way you should do it, but just be aware that different scenarios can happen to where it might not end up well. So
Mm-hmm.
you kind of just have to make the judgment call depending on the personality of that fish in the
Gotcha.
moment.
Gotcha. Todd from TB Metal Art is asking, do you save the bills? And if so, what do you do with them?
Oh, absolutely. You should definitely save some parts of the swordfish. Um, I like having souvenirs myself, so I definitely save the bill. The eye socket, the eye itself is really cool as well. You could save those, and it's all hard bony. And then the dorsal spine, from the dorsal fin, when you cut it off the fish, go down a little deeper towards the spine, and you could clean that off. And the bones that are in there are really cool looking as well.
Excellent. Excellent. That's good to know. Carrie's chiming in. If you don't have your own boat, is sword fishing something you can buy or use your own gear for, like similar to tuna fishing, or are you better off using it on a charter boat?
So if you're going on a swordfish charter, they're usually fully outfitted. They have all the gear ready to go. If you're gonna do it yourself on a friend's boat, for example, most of the guys that started out sword fishing here started out with equipment they already had and did some modifications to it. You could definitely get by with that. However, once if you commit to it and know that you're going to do it regularly, it's definitely optimal to buy specific gear for swordfish fishing, because like the rods, for example, the swordfish rods all have ring guides on them, and except for the tip, we use a very special tip from Winthrop Tackle, and the roller assembly on it is what's called a captive roller. So the roller is wider than the frame, and the side plates actually captively hold that roller in place. So your line can't jump the edge of that roller and get wedged between the frame and the roller, causing you a malfunction to lose the fish, right? That can break your line.
Absolutely.
So on your old school conventional roller tips, that was an issue, especially since we're using lighter spectra like 80-pound spectra. So there's definitely an advantage to swordfish specific equipment with regards to that.
Excellent. Well, let's kind of talk about that. Typically, I know you'd mentioned you were fishing a Makara 80 wide, and now you're fishing about 80-pound Spectra.
Mhm.
Are you still using some mono as a top shot for the stretch, or are you just going straight Spectra to the wind on leader?
Oh, definitely no mono
Okay.
for the stretch. Our wind on leaders are 75 feet to 100 feet for the most part. Some guys use the 150-foot leaders, but I feel that's not necessary for Southern California with the low current that we have. That's more of like a Florida rig for higher current, in my opinion.
Okay.
But for the most part, it's the backing on your reel. And then from there, I go to what's called a buoy wind-on leader, which not many people know about here on the West Coast. It's like another wind-on that you put deep in your reel, which is gonna be the connection point for the buoy. And what that'll do is it provides chafe protection, so you don't chafe up your main line if it starts rubbing on the buoy when a fish is swimming the buoy under. Doesn't happen very often, but it can happen.
Excellent. Okay.
So from there, I usually have 1,000 feet of 80-pound spectra, and then that connects to my main swordfish wind-on leader.
Excellent. Awesome. Well, so you kind of touched on it a little bit earlier about how swordfish, it's a whole different animal, and they are really trying to hurt you and to size you up to see how they can get away. For those of us that don't really do it terribly often, or for those of us who are trying to get back into it or get into it in general,
Mm-hmm.
any safety tips that we could follow, or any correct methods that we can use to kind of stay safe while we're doing this?
Sure, sure. So if you find yourself hooked up to a swordfish and you're on a private boat, um, I like to unclutter the deck. So there's just random things that end up on the deck while you're fishing that are going to be in the way when it comes time to the end game. So if it's, extra coolers that you really don't need there, anything you can move out of the way and unclutter the deck, extra dock lines that you can trip over, any of that stuff. Really, I take the philosophy to that cockpit is your workspace. When you're fighting the fish, you want to maximize your odds of landing it. So try to play out different scenarios in your head about what else you have on the boat, and try to structure everything so it'll go smoother for you. Like yesterday, for example, we were hooked up to that bluefin and we had a bunch of stuff on the deck. We had 2 kill bags, uh, another cooler, and the helium tank. So I'm like, all right, dude, it's go time. We got to clear the deck. I want all that stuff cleaned up. And my buddy starts putting stuff, tucking stuff away in different corners. I'm like, that's not good enough. We need that completely out of the way. So, um, we made adjustments. I moved stuff out of the way and made room so we could shift from one side of the boat to the other without stuff in the way. And when it comes to actually getting the fish on the boat, you want to take your time with it. Um, you don't want to gaff a green fish because they will explode and you will see an immense amount of power coming from these fish. A lot of people's boats have battle wounds from swordfish. Their bills got chips of will chip away at your gel coat. Their tails pounding on the side of the boat. It's gonna scare you. So get them tired out to where they turn more like a brownish color, and before you decide to stick a gaff in them is definitely the safest approach. And when you do, you should aim for headshots. Don't try to go for the middle of the body, because once they start kicking that tail away, they will tear that gaff through their right out of them.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's kind of talk about gaffing there. Headshot's always the key. I've heard of guys trying, going for a tail shot as well. And, whether that's good or bad, I'm not sure. Swordfish, obviously the meat is premium meat. You kind of want to stay away from that whole body just to preserve the meat, right? Kind of like a bluefin or a yellowfin tuna, right?
Absolutely. Like, that's a great point there. With not just with swordfish, with any species, right? Like, I see a lot of tunas gaffed in the body or in the belly area, and it makes me cringe. Like, how are you gonna put a gaff in the toro? Like, that's the prime meat of a bluefin tuna.
Yeah.
So be a little more aware, and
Hmm.
um, don't be so rushed to get the gaff in it. Like, set it up,
Hmm.
set that fish up, swim them in, and then give the guy a nice clean shot at him.
Exactly.
If for the harpoon that they stick on the spine, swordfish gonna get hard for the meat.
Yeah, but we don't do that here.
Okay.
Sorry,
Yeah.
my wife was telling me about another conversation I had with a friend of mine, but
It,
you know, it's different fishery.
yeah, yeah. I mean, when it comes to myself personally, I'm not in a, obviously we want to get that fish in absolutely at the end of the day, but at the same time, I'm not sure if I want to take a risky shot at the risk of losing the fish too when you've got a line right in front of you, or especially just a clean headshot as well. You always want to go for that too. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah, don't be so rushed to get that first gaff in him. Um, have a little more patience with it, and it'll pay off. It'll pay off with you getting a nice, cleaner shot at it, and it might even pay off with make the difference between you landing that fish or not. Because there's a lot of times where people get a bad gaff shot in a big bluefin, and then it goes absolutely nuts and rips away from the boat and gets away.
mhm,
So people don't play out that scenario. They just get caught up in the moment. But
mhm.
be a little more
Absolutely.
patient. Absolutely.
Yeah. So Jim has a question. How do you determine how much line you have out without an electric reel?
Good question. When I first started, we were using like a clip-on line counter, but the problem is that they're all pretty rinky-dink. There's not really good high-quality unit out unless you're spending several $100s, and they're not that accurate. So realistically, the best way to do it is to actually configure that reel on a line winder. So when I configure reels for clients, I'm putting the buoy wind on deep in the reel for them to clip the buoy to it, right? So when they get out to the grounds and they see the scattering layer around 1,000 feet and decide they want to put their bait 1,000 feet, they just let that line out, and then out comes the buoy wind on. That's their place for them to clip on the buoy. Or if they're using it as a tip rod, that's your main marker there, to determine that you have enough line out. Now, granted, you do have to make adjustments with different speeds of drifts, right? So if the current is ripping and the wind's going with the current or against the current, then it's causing more blow back, more blow in the line.
Mhm.
Then you got to make an adjustment with a heavier weight, or you have to let more line out. But a lot of times we could actually see the weight on the fish finder and visually confirm that my bait is at the appropriate depth.
Interesting. Interesting. Very cool.
A lot of
Uh,
guys have also done Sharpie marks. Like
okay.
if
Yeah.
they got white spectra, they'll mark it. You can go over to an area that has 1,000 foot bottom, for example. Drop your weight down until you touch the bottom. Mark your spectra. Hope you don't get hung up, and bring it back up. A few different
Good
ways
point.
to do it.
Good point. Good point. That's awesome. He also asked, what is the maximum drift speed when deep dropping for sorties?
That's a good question. I don't think there really is a maximum, to be honest. Most importantly is having enough weight to keep your line down so you don't get a lot of blowback, and you know that your bait's in the zone or at the target depth that you want to be. As far as the drift speed, you know, it's hard to say. 2 miles an hour would be pretty fast drift speed, and I think you'd need to upsize your weight at that point. Some guys are, still using their 130-pound braid that they use for tuna. That's going to catch a lot more water with the bait down 1,000 feet and give you more blowback than the guys that are using 80-pound spectra. So, it goes back to equipment configuration. You could definitely optimize it by having dedicated equipment for it.
Excellent. And then lastly, on the equipment, Jim also wants to know, how many flying gaffs do you typically have on your boat?
I have a total of 3, and I usually have 2 at the ready.
Okay.
So if I'm gonna stick a fish, I usually have 2 flying gaffs ready to go, one on each side of the boat.
Excellent. Excellent. And, obviously it goes without saying how, you know, when that fish finally comes up and it's that critical point where you're in, you know, pretty shallow color and it's almost time to gap, you know, it's almost like you don't want to be reaching or going into the cabin or yelling at your buddy to go explain where the gaps are and all that. You always want to have your gaps and all your equipment that you need ready, you know, to go right then and there. So it just you just grab it and just do it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, definitely makes a difference to have a plan in place and, you know, have a nice layout of where you're going to put certain gaffs and stuff, and even down to the rod holders, for example. I'm pretty particular on how I like boats set up for fishing swordfish. I really like the 0 degree rod holders, the vertical ones that do not have built-in swivels, and I use the drop-in swivels on those. So I like to have four of them on the boat, two at the back corners of the gunnels, and then two more farther forward on the gunnels. So when you're drifting, you're usually using the back two, and when you're fighting the fish, you move it to the forward um, rod holder, and you can drive on the fish and keep that rod in an optimal angle. And then when it when it's time for the end game, you could get the fish close enough to gaff it from the back corner. Because if you kept that rod in the back corner while you're trying to gaff it, it's going to put the fish farther away from you.
Good point. Good point. Lastly, Serge, let's kind of talk a little bit about bait, and Jim just brought that up too. Are you typically rigging or making your own bait, or do you typically fish artificials, or do you rig them all, or how do you address the bait situation?
So the bait situation, most of the guys are going to like Asian markets or their local tackle shop to buy swordfish baits, which are usually the larger squids. Um, they call them jumbo squids, I guess. And there's a few different kinds that you could experiment with to see what works better for you. But for the most part, it's the big squids. And what we're doing is we're putting the leader through them all the way down from the mouth all the way up to the tip, and have we place the hook down by the head of the squid, and then we stitch them up all the way up to the tip, and then we're usually using skirts, like a plastic skirt over the tip of the squid to make it more water dynamic, so it swims straighter, it doesn't spin on you, and then it also provides additional protection for the bait for when the swordfish starts beating on it with their bill. I've seen people's baits to where they're mostly picked off the leader, and they get back, scraps of the bait when they get them back. And that usually happens when you don't stitch them enough from, the bottom to the top.
Excellent, excellent. Well, Serge, I can't thank you enough for joining us this afternoon. It was awesome talking to you. One more time, how do we go onto Swordfish Gear, and how do we follow your direction when it comes to sword fishing?
Thanks, guys. So, my Facebook profile, I guess it's the one that's linked on right now, Surge Vasquez. And then I have a website called Swordfish Gear, swordfishgear.com. And that's where you could go and see the different products that you would use for getting into swordfish fishing. I'm always available as well. I answer private messages or phone calls. So if someone's considering getting into it, don't hesitate to reach out.
Awesome, awesome. And lastly, do you offer any kind of private charters or anything like that?
Not at the moment, but I might in the future. I'm actually looking at getting my guide license because I have, a few people requesting to take me on their boat with them and stuff. So might as well do something legit with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Serge, I can't thank you enough, man. Thank you so much for joining us. It was awesome having you.
All right, guys. Pleasure to be on the show with you guys. I'm a big supporter of CCA, and I really appreciate what they've done for the private recreational fishermen. And even like lastly with the last round, I don't know, a lot of people don't know that the Department of Fish and Game and the Fish and Game Commission were trying to pass additional, rules and regulations on the swordfish. They wanted to reduce the limits on the recreational sport fishermen, and I think the CCA stepped in and did their part as well. So I think all the anglers out there need to be aware of the Fish and Games meetings and their proposed changes, and be a little more active, because a lot of guys aren't, and I was one of those. I really didn't become active in that until the past year. So now I'm more aware of what changes they try to bring up and put in place. And it's, with regards to the swordfish stuff, it was all premature. They were talking about reducing the private limits to maybe even one per boat or two per boat, which is, it sounds okay at first, but if you figure a boat with a 5-man crew that's actively trying to chase swordfish, they're not getting fish every trip, So, say they could go a week chasing swordfish without landing one, and finally one day they get on a good bite and have a chance to each take a fish home. That would be nice. That would be epic for them to be able to do that. So, changing the boat limit, in my opinion, isn't a good thing.
Awesome. Well, I can't thank you enough, man. And you're absolutely right. People do need to stay active, stay involved. And one way to do that is join CCA, where we kind of do that for you. But thank you so much, Surge. Really, really appreciate
Absolutely.
you coming on here.
All right, guys. Thank you for the opportunity.
Awesome. And we will see you guys next week. Thank you so much for joining us.